Self-esteem and narcissism. In everyday discourse, it is commonly believed that aggressive individuals have low self-esteem and engage in aggressive behavior to increase their feelings of self-worth. However, research shows the link between self-esteem and aggression to be more complicated. Reviews of the literature have found evidence for a significant association between low self-esteem and aggression, but also identified studies that showed the reverse relationship, a curvilinear relationship, or no link at all. To make sense of this conflicting evidence, a theoretical analysis is needed as to why and how low or high self-esteem should be linked to aggression. To begin with, there is agreement among researchers that having genuinely high self-esteem, reflected in objective achievements and mirrored in a positive evaluation by others, works as a protective factor against aggression. Low self-esteem has been linked to aggression via the experience of shame and humiliation that elicits anger and thereby promotes aggressive behavior. However, other authors have argued that aggression requires risk-taking and confidence of success, which people with low self-esteem do not normally have. They suggest that it is unrealistically high, inflated, but fragile self-esteem that leads to aggressive behavior and introduce the concept of narcissism to denote this problematic type of self-esteem. Narcissism is characterized by a grandiose view of superiority and a sense of entitlement that leads to aggression when the person is challenged by others. Baumeister et al. 2000. It is part of the dark triad of personality traits linked to aggression, the other two being Machiavellianism and psychopathy, which together make up the malevolent side of personality. Narcissism, personality trait denoting a grandiose view of the self and strong sense of entitlement. Several self-report scales have been developed to measure individual differences in narcissism. For example, the Narcissistic Personality Inventory, NPI, 1988, which contains items such as, "If I ruled the world, it would be a much better place." From the perspective of narcissism, aggression is seen as serving an ego-protective function, and it is activated to restore a threatened sense of personal superiority. Therefore, narcissists are particularly prone to aggressive behavior in response to stimuli perceived as a threat to a positive sense of self-worth, such as negative feedback or provocation. To differentiate narcissism from high self-esteem, it can be said that an individual with high self-esteem thinks he or she is good, a narcissistic individual thinks he or she is better. In line with Berkowitz's cognitive neo-associationist model of aggression, Baumeister and Bowden, 1998, stipulated that a threat to self-esteem precipitates aggression by eliciting anger. To the extent that the negative appraisal is perceived as unjustified, it evokes anger, which in turn increases the probability of an aggressive response. There is evidence from correlational and experimental studies that narcissism is related to aggression in a wide range of areas, including laboratory aggression, domestic violence, driving aggression, and even murder and assault. Consistent with the proposition that narcissists engage in aggression to cope with threats to their fragile self-esteem, a meta-analysis by Rasmussen, 2016, found a significant link between narcissism and retaliative aggression. In a similar vein, the review by Lam et al., 2018, found that narcissism was more strongly linked to aggression following ego threat. The finding that narcissists show more aggression in response to negative feedback that was delivered in public than to negative feedback delivered in private indicates that it is the concern about negative evaluation by others that is critical in understanding the link between narcissism and aggression. Although self-esteem and narcissism are related constructs, they were found to make separate contributions to the prediction of aggressive behavior, although findings about the combined effect are inconsistent. Bushman et al. 2009 found that the combination of high self-esteem and high narcissism produced the highest levels of direct aggression in a competitive reaction time measure of aggression. In a further study, Bushman et al. 2009 replicated the findings in a realistic context using the essay evaluation paradigm. See Chapter 1 for the two methods. Students first received either positive or negative feedback about an essay from a fellow student and were then asked to assign a grade to the feedback that would count towards the other student's course mark. The lowest grades, indicating the highest level of aggression, were assigned by students who scored high on both self-esteem and narcissism. By contrast, a recent study by LaMarche and Siri, 2019, showed that individuals with a combination of high narcissism and low self-esteem were most likely to endorse sexual coercion following reminders of rejection by close others. In the same vein, Hart et al. 2019 found a stronger association between narcissism and aggression in participants who were low as compared with high in self-esteem. Further research is needed to clarify when and why the combination of narcissism with either high or low self-esteem is linked more closely to aggressive behavior. Although the theoretical concept of narcissism links it primarily to provoked and direct aggression against the source of the provocation, studies have also demonstrated a link with unprovoked aggression and aggression displaced onto a third party. Reedy et al. 2010 used a competitive reaction time task to classify their participants as unprovoked aggressors, those who chose to deliver an aversive shock to an alleged opponent even before they received the first shock, retaliative aggressors, those who only delivered aversive shocks after receiving a shock from their opponent, and non-aggressors, those who refrained from delivering shocks altogether. They found that unprovoked aggressors scored significantly higher on a trait measure of narcissism than both the provoked aggressor and the non-aggressor groups. With regard to displaced aggression, Twenge and Campbell, 2003, studied narcissists' aggressive responses after a social rejection, which should be a powerful form of ego threat. In a series of experiments, they found that narcissists not only reacted more angrily to social rejection and showed more direct aggression against the person rejecting them, but also behaved more aggressively towards a third party. Corroborating the idea that narcissists' higher aggression is contingent upon the experience of ego threat, no difference between high and low narcissists' aggressive behavior was found following social acceptance. We shall examine social rejection as a situational factor of aggression in more detail in Chapter 5. Other research has identified components of narcissism that may be particularly maladaptive as far as aggression is concerned. For example, Reedy et al. 2008 found that entitlement, e.g., I will never be satisfied until I get all that I deserve, and exploitation, e.g., I find it easy to manipulate people, were the two sub-dimensions of narcissism as measured by the NPI most closely related to aggressive behavior in a competitive reaction time task, whereas other dimensions, such as vanity and self-sufficiency, were unrelated to aggression. These findings suggest that narcissism represents a construct with multiple aspects referring to an exaggerated sense of self-worth, not all of which may be related to aggression. A second line of research has been directed at breaking down narcissism into different domains of self-esteem. For example, Widman and McNulty, 2010, found that a specific measure of sexual narcissism, with components such as sexual entitlement and a grandiose sense of sexual skills, predicted men's engagement in sexual aggression better than a global measure of narcissism. In a meta-analysis that looked at differences in narcissism scores over time, Twenge et al. 2008 found a significant generational shift over a period of 25 years, with greater endorsement of the narcissism items of the NPI in more recent studies. Given the strong evidence that links narcissism to aggression, this does look like a worrying trend. On a more positive note, Tomez et al. 2009 conducted a school-based field experiment with adolescents and were able to show that a brief self-affirmation intervention in which participants were asked to write a paragraph on their most important personal values reduced aggressive behavior in high narcissists over a 1-week period. Lack of self-control and impulsivity. A further aspect of the self that is relevant to the understanding of individual differences in aggression is self-control. This construct refers to internal restraints that should inhibit the release of aggressive response tendencies. Evidence for a link between lack of self-control and aggressive and violent behavior comes from studies of general population samples, as well as studies of criminal offenders. The fact that many criminals commit a variety of different offenses, together with the observation that criminal behavior is often accompanied by a lack of self-control in other areas, e.g., heavy smoking, excessive alcohol consumption, supports the idea of a general self-control problem underlying aggressive behavior. Lower self-control was also related to physical violence against a dating partner in a study by Archer et al. 2010. According to Denson's 2013 model of rumination, individuals with deficits in executive function are more prone to angry rumination because they have problems inhibiting anger-related thoughts. In line with this theorizing, a recent study by Lee et al. 2019 showed that better self-control is linked to lower aggression via a reduced tendency to ruminate about anger-arousing events. Impulsivity, which is the opposite of self-control, has consistently been linked to aggression, according to the meta-analysis of 93 studies by Brezin 2019. Impulsivity is composed of 4 facets, namely negative urgency, lack of premeditation, lack of perseverance, and sensation seeking. Negative urgency describes the tendency for rash action when experiencing negative affect. Lack of premeditation refers to the tendency to act without prior planning. Lack of perseverance refers to the tendency to give up quickly in the face of difficulties, and sensation seeking indicates a preference for activities that provide a sense of thrill and adventure. Significant meta-analytic effects in the small to moderate range were found for each facet, with stronger associations for negative urgency and lack of premeditation than for the other 2 facets. Most of the evidence on the role of impulsivity in explaining aggression is based on self-reports, but a recent study by Subramani et al. 2019 used an experimental design. They show that higher trait disinhibition, defined as deficient impulse control, predicted more aggressive behavior in response to a provocation, but only when participants' attention was not distracted away from the provoking stimulus. The evidence reviewed in this section points to a number of personal characteristics that can help to explain why individuals differ in their readiness to act aggressively, even when exposed to the same situational conditions. However, as shown by the comprehensive meta-analysis conducted by Betancourt et al. 2006, the majority of the personality variables considered in this section only predict aggression in situations that activate the respective affective or cognitive processes, for example, by presenting a provocation. This finding supports the general aggression model by showing that it is the interaction of individual differences and features of the situation that shapes the aggressive response.